topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. This show has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015, and it has been ranked on the top 10 most inspirational leadership podcasts on the web, and we are number one. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a culture and leadership activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help our clients create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their higher potential, and are committed to stay and deliver on the company's mission, all which translates to higher profits for you. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, we have with us today Alex Budak. He is a UC Berkeley faculty member, social entrepreneur, author, and speaker. At UC Berkeley, he teaches his wildly popular course called Becoming a Changemaker, directs the Berkeley Haas Global Access Program, and teaches in Berkeley executive education programs. He co-founded Start Some Good, which has helped over 1,200 changemakers in over 50 countries raise millions of dollars to launch and scale new change initiatives. He's slightly up to something. He is the author of Becoming a Changemaker, an actionable, inclusive guide to leading positive change at any level, which we'll be talking about on today's program. He joins us today from Berkeley, California. Alex, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Elise, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So great to have you. And as I mentioned, I was in your neck of the woods when I was reading this. I was right in Berkeley reading your book, as I said to you, waiting for you to come into that cafe and sit down with me and talk about your book. But we have to do it here anyway. So how's that?
Perfect. I'll take it.
Okay, well, let's crack into this. So, you are clearly, riveted on this idea of making change. So where did the fascination come from?
Well, like so many things, it's sort of like the Steve Jobs commencement address where it only makes sense looking backwards. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've always sort of found myself in areas of change. I grew up in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. So I've always kind of been around innovation and entrepreneurship, but for better or worse, was just never driven to create something just for the sake of money. It's fine if you are, that wasn't me. And so for me, it happened while I was living and working in India that I first got introduced to the concept of social entrepreneurship. And that's really what you do, at least. I mean, it's blending the idea of purpose and profit together. And so that kind of catalyzed my journey as a social entrepreneur. My social venture, Start Some Good, really aimed to help change makers make a difference in their community. But as I did that work, I realized that, some of my friends were social entrepreneurs. I loved being around social entrepreneurs, but I also recognized that we're a weird bunch. We're not the typical people, and that not everyone can nor should be a social entrepreneur. It's one amazing way to make change, but far from the only. And so as I reflected on that, I started thinking, what's a more inclusive way we could think about leading change? How can we think about empowering everyone to be an agent of change, not just the people with a fancy title or that start their own organization? And so that's where, sort of building on my previous experience, my lived experience, it sort of all came together and said, yeah, change making. That's where I want to be, and that's what I've dedicated the last 15 years or so of my life.
I think it's fantastic, and I one of my things that really causes me to really get the kajibis, if that is an actual word, is when I go into organizations and I hear, well, that's just how we do things around here. Mm. Oh my gosh, please don't say anything like that. So for you've got a very unique perspective on change. Why do you think change making is so important in the world?
Well, there's both the macro reason and then the micro. And so the macro reason, if you just look at all the trends shaping our world today, from COVID, which appeared on the scene a few years ago, to climate, to inequality, you could say like, hey, I just want to keep things the way that they are. And I get that, that's comfortable. But as COVID showed us, if we just try to stay the same, we might not exist for much longer. And so I think there's an imperative at just the macro scale that the world is changing faster and faster than ever before. And it will also never change this slowly ever again. So we've got to get comfortable with the changes around us. You could hope that things will slow down. You could wish things would change less, but that's not going to happen. So that's the macro reason why. Then on the micro reason is, I believe everyone can have a sense of meaning, of fulfillment, of purpose, of belonging. And it's sad to me. It's understandable sometimes, but it's sad to me when people just feel so beaten down by systems. And again, there are really unfair, unjust systems, and there's plenty of bureaucracies that try to take that life out of us. But there's also that opportunity to sort of turn on your own switch and say, look, change can be a huge threat, and it's scary, but there's also opportunity in the threat. I love the word of the singer-songwriter Joan Baez. She says, action is the antidote to despair. Mm-hmm. So it's fair to say, look, don't feel any despair. Don't feel frustration. Don't feel like things shouldn't change. Feel that, but then find a bias towards action. And in that action, you often find your meaning.
Oh, Alex, I love that. In the world of psychology, we have a fun word to describe what you're talking about, and that is human agency. So when we can activate our own sense of agency, yes, it's incredibly energizing and fulfilling. So yes, it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you in my program. I want more of these change makers that can actually exercise that agency. So, all right, so now we have to go next to this wonderful part that I loved so much in your book about learning how it is that this now famous change making course that you teach at UC Berkeley. But the way that it really began is fantastic. You were really quite precocious in how that came to be. I know the story, but our listeners and viewers don't. So if you could tell the story, of how it came to be that you proposed that, offered it, and then how you actually created it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, the story of life is so often there's a lot of luck, and there's also the people that are looking out for you. And I think I had kind of a perfect storm there, combined with what you said, that idea of human agency. I think that's the underpinning. But I'd been at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business for about a year or so. And I found out that my role was getting changed. And so I went into one of my mentor's offices. He just happened to be the person that oversaw all the faculty and all the curriculum at Berkeley Haas. And so we're kind of talking about my transition. What was my next step going to be? But I think he could kind of tell that my heart wasn't in it. He knew me to be very passionate, but I think he saw like I wasn't really in it. And then he said to me just very directly, "But Alex, what do you really want to do?" And in that moment, it became super clear to me. I said, well, I want to teach. And again, keep in mind that I don't have a PhD. I'm not a traditional faculty member and had never taught even at high school before. But to my surprise, instead of shutting me down or telling me all of the dozens of reasons it's not a good idea, he said, okay, we want to teach. And again, it was very clear to me. I said, I want to teach a class called Becoming a Changemaker. And I pretty much expected him to say like, okay, that's nice, but we're a business school. We're not going to teach that here. But again, to my surprise, he said, okay, put together a syllabus, show it to me, and we'll go from there. And so I shook his hand, leaping out of my seat, left his office, closed the door, and then literally immediately Googled how to create a syllabus, because I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew it was too good of an opportunity to let fly by. And so that was the beginning of it, was someone that gave me a chance and this clear sense of purpose of wanting to say, how can we create a class that help more people become change makers?
Well, and then you go on. I love that story. So listeners and viewers, just listen to that, right? Take some inspiration from that. If there's something you want to do, just go, be bold, be precocious. My daughter, when she was like 5, she said, she came back from this summer camp. She goes, Mama, I learned something today. You don't ask, you don't get. And I said, boy, you just remember that throughout your whole life and you'll be just fine. But then it gets better, because then you actually create the course, and then the day comes when you're going to open the doors for the first set of students, and you're hoping there's going to be a couple of people in there, and the thing is overflowing with students everywhere. So great, Alex.
It brought me to tears, honestly, because it's very meaningful to put your own self into the world in this way. You do this with your books, you're speaking.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe something about, if I were teaching an accounting class, every school has an accounting class, and that's important. That's not sort of deeply who I am. This class was deeply who I am, my values, my philosophies, my belief in people that could be leaders. And so, yeah, I opened up that door and found that not only was every seat full, that there were students sitting on the stairs, sitting on the windowsills, like people just wanted to be part of this. And it wasn't me. It was just, I was tapping into something, this idea that these students were hungry for something greater than themselves. They had maybe this energy and enthusiasm, but they wanted a sense of how do I turn that into a real purpose? And that really crystallized for me that this was a meaningful thing I was about to start, and gave me so much meaning going forward to say, yeah, I'm serving these students.
Yeah, I really understand that. When you create something of your own and you present it and people really respond to it, there's nothing better than that feeling. But that's exactly why. So, what I got from your share and what you said in the book is this is an indication of how much people really want to matter. People don't want to go through life hoping that they squeak under the radar screen and nobody notices. They want to matter, which is why I put that into this episode title, by the way. So, yeah, I think you were tapping into this craving that we all have to matter. And that's more of the work that I'm doing in the world, too, is let's help more people do that by the way that we create our organizations and our cultures and lead people. So, yes. Brilliant, Alex. I want to take class.
Yes to mattering, and yes to feeling like they're connecting into something greater than themselves. Yeah, I think we can activate that in folks.
Yeah. So then what I do in this program is I like to do a little bit of teaching. Of course, there's always an inspirational component here, but there's a few things in your book that I just kind of wanted to pepper and bring forth. Obviously, we can't discuss everything in your book because there's just so much in it. But I did want you to cover off on the three fundamental building blocks that you talk about in change making that I just think is really useful. Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about having a change maker mindset, we first start by recognizing that really change happens at the edges of things. I'm in a university, and universities love this idea of what's your major, what's your discipline. And as you get higher and higher up as a professor, it's not just that you are, a psychology professor. You are an expert in the social psychology of small groups. Like you get so hyper focused. But the truth is that any of the meaningful problems we're going to solve won't be solved by any one discipline, any one approach, any one person. And so change makers learn to innovate at the edges, to find ways where one discipline starts, the other begins, and that sort of magic point in between. It's messy and it's not clear, but that's where a lot of the magic happens. Then the second thing is learned hopefulness. I think in some of our circles, we run the risk of something called toxic positivity. That's the idea that you just sort of like ignore all the problems and go, oh, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Like, don't worry. And that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is this idea of you've learned helplessness, kind of like you talked about the someone that says, that's just the way things are. But learned hopefulness is the idea that, yeah, things are tough, but things can be better. We can do something about it. Rebecca Solnit says that hope isn't just something that you clutch. It's an axe you use to break down doors with. So it can be better, and you can actually do something with it. And so that's how we can kind of start conceptualizing the change maker mindset of how we show up in the world and how we see change around us.
Yeah. And did you did I miss it? The first one that I had to is there's always another way. Did you already talk about that one?
No, that's right. I can speak to that as well.
Yeah, I love that. That also speaks to how we open the show. There's always another way to do something.
Yeah, or what we might call like possibility intelligence, that it's so tempting to just go like, okay, it's either A or B. And once you get comfortable recognizing that the world is complex, you actually see that it's not just CDE, it's almost infinite, that there's always other ways. And I learned a lot of this from one of my mentors. He's an entrepreneur, and he was so good at not just taking the first offer, that even when an offer was good, he'd always explore, like he wouldn't just feel tempted to go, what else can we do here? What else is possible? And I think part of this is actually being really empathetic and listening to the other person. We think about, for instance, a negotiation. We sometimes think the point of a negotiation is to win. I'm going to beat that other person. I'm going to get as much as I can and as little as they can. But actually, the best negotiations are where you care a lot about your own needs and about the other person's needs. Yeah. And when you do that, you find that it's not just A versus B, that all these new possibilities come out as a result. The creative friction from new ideas coming together, it's holding that space. It might take a little bit longer, might take a little more values work, might take a little focus on process. But once you start realizing that the world isn't as black and white, then you see it's not just sort of shades of gray, it's actually multicolored. Like there's wonderful possibilities that are there if you're just willing to see them.
I love that, Alex. I love that. Now, for this next thing, I wanted to have you speak to, which really speaks to this notion of how much change making is available to anyone and actually really facilitates this. I love how you talk about there being 3 ways to rapidly accelerate your career and your impact. Most everybody has a career and most everybody wants to make impact. So let's just quickly talk about those 3 ways.
Yeah, so step 1, become a change maker yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's sort of the table stakes. Then the next one is, can you surround yourself with other people who are change makers? I say, like, kind of all things equal, if you're thinking about a new job, can you join a team that's filled with change makers? Can you find a manager who's a change maker, someone who will champion you, who again will see those possibilities for you? And you could be the most outstanding change maker, but I see, unfortunately, a lot of folks that have that energy when they first enter the workforce get the kind of beaten out of them because they don't find their community of change makers. So 1, become a change maker. 2, surround yourself with change makers. And the third, the most powerful, is help other people become change makers. There's a saying I love, which is that when you teach, 1 person teaches and 2 people learn. And so you're always learning. There's no better way to learn than by teaching yourself. But also, can you create and catalyze those moments where other people become change makers too? An example here I think about is Muhammad Yunus. He's the Nobel Prize winner. He's often thought of as the godfather, the founding father of microfinance, getting small loans to people, especially women, especially in the global South, that then allow them to start businesses, support their family with incredible repayment rates. So this was thanks to COVID. And again, sort of that idea of see more possibilities. He's an idol of mine. I reached out to him and figured, well, at worst, he'll say, no, I can't come speak to your class. But at best, hey, it's COVID. Maybe he'll just say, yes, I'll join virtually, whatever. And he said, yes. And as he spoke to my class, as we thought about his career, he often gets a lot of credit for this sort of visionary idea, the way he revolutionized finance. But actually what he did was empowered hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people to see themselves as change makers, to give them that capital that they need. And that's where those real ripples of change can happen.
And that's so inspiring. The very stuff that we talk about on the show. Alex, thanks for that beautiful example. Just before I go on break, let people think about that. I am your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air and talking with Alex Budak. He is a UC Berkeley faculty member, social entrepreneur, author, and speaker. We've been talking a bit about where this idea, this fascination with change making came from, and kind of getting into some of the crucial elements of it. After the break, we're going to start talking about a few of the concepts and tools you can start to fold into yourself to become your own change maker. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I, too, am dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work. They are realizing how they can matter. They're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my books. So my last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help readers understand the changed lay of today's workforce. What do they want and need to stay with you? And then it offers 22 best practices to help you fold into your culture to actually make that so. You can find more about it at elisecortez.com or on Amazon. If you are just joining us now, my guest is Alex Budak. He is the author of Becoming a Changemaker, an actionable, inclusive guide to leading positive change at any level. Okay, so Alex, let's get into some of the nuts and bolts here. Again, one of the things I love about your book is that you're teaching us some things, but then you give us these tools and concepts that we can really start to work for ourselves. So the first one that I wanted to talk about here, and I love this, I think this is so, so important. Again, going back to the beginning of the show, is talking about the idea of questioning the status quo.
It's one of the values of Berkeley Haas. It's literally written into the cement in front of some of our buildings. And so when I found myself there, I thought this is a place that I want to be. And as we think about the world today, there's a lot of status quos that need to be disrupted. When you step into your workforce, there's a lot of status quos, a lot of things that are done. And like you said, someone asks you, why do we do things? Oh, it's the way it's done. It's the way it's always been. And so we need folks that are willing to sort of shake up the status quo and to have the courage to question it. Now, as we think about it, I think there's first a framework that comes from social psychology that's helpful. It's called idiosyncrasy credits. This is the work of Edwin Hollander, kind of a classic social psychologist. And what I often hear from students and executives is they want to question the status quo, but they think they won't be well received. So Hollander tells us that you can earn these idiosyncrasy credits. These are little credits you can use to diverge from group norms. Everyone's going one way, you can go the other. How do you earn these? You earn these through two ways. One is through competence, by doing good work. If you show up on their first day of work and you try to question everything, people will go, who is this person? Why should we trust them? So you've got to first do competent, good work. The second one is that you go along with the flow on some things. Think of this as sort of picking your battle. If you're someone who questions the status quo on literally everything, people won't know if you're actually serious about it or if you're just a contrarian. So instead, the idea is maybe there's 10 things you want to change. There's 2 you really care about. Well, let those other 8 go, let them be, and then focus your energy on the 2. So that's a helpful framing perhaps to know how and when you decide to go about questioning the status quo. But then the other tool I'll suggest is a mental framework of zigging when others zag. So oftentimes when you see everyone going in one direction with one trend, one approach, there's often opportunity going the opposite way. If everyone in your industry is going low price, cheap margins, shaving off every penny that they can, well, maybe there's an opportunity to stand out in another way. If every company is going, let's cut our customer support and just go all AI, well, maybe there's an opportunity to really go deep and human. Yeah. So you'll know best in your industry what makes sense. But change makers are comfortable with seeing, okay, everyone's going one way. And sometimes we feel pressure to go, oh, if everyone's going that way, it must be the right way. Well, maybe. But often there's big opportunity if you can zig when others zag.
I love that. I just think there's so much utility in that, especially as a change maker. So I love that tool. That's interesting. Now, the next one that I thought I found this to be quite interesting and compelling, and I don't know why it was so surprising to see it there, but the concept that you talk about, or the tool, is confidence without attitude.
I'm a deep believer in humility. I lived in Stockholm, Sweden for 3 years, and Scandinavian culture really values humility. And I've always been someone who values humility. You can imagine being in Silicon Valley. That's maybe not the most humble of places.
Right.
Place. But in Scandinavia, I saw, well, no, actually, humility can be a strength. And I think that a lot of Americans really get this wrong. Sometimes we think that humility is a weakness. It means people will walk all over us. But I think at its core, I think of it the way that Clayton Christensen, the classic professor from Harvard, thought about it, which is that to truly be humble, you see the very best in others. You can only do that if you feel good about yourself. So I see confidence and humility actually going hand in hand. I teach at a business school, and not everyone, of course, is humble. We see a lot of people that have that sort of false bravado. The ones that always want to hear their voice. The people that raise their hand, start speaking. They don't know what they're going to say. They just figure, I'll figure it out as I go. And sometimes my more humble students are intimidated by that. But the truth is, a lot of times when people are like that, they're sort of overly boisterous. It actually belies a lack of self-confidence.
That's right. Yes.
The true confidence comes from knowing yourself, knowing your values, knowing who you are, knowing that it's okay to be quiet sometimes if it's in service of something else. And so the way I think about confidence without attitude is a both and. That in order to be an effective leader, you have to have the confidence. You've got to be confident enough to stand up and say, look, I want to fight for this change. I believe in this. Here's my vision. Come along with me. That takes a lot of confidence. But it also requires humility to have other people listen to you, to listen to them, to be open to other ideas. There's an idea I just recently read about, which I love. This comes from the work of Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao at Stanford University. And they talk about this idea of flexing the hierarchy. we often think that it's either or, right? Again, Changemaker is seeing possibilities. So that either we have a very strict hierarchy, it's the CEO, the senior vice president, the vice president, all the way down, or we have this completely flat egalitarian organization. And the truth is neither of those work. You don't want one that's either or. What you want is a leader that can flex the hierarchy. So an example you might think about is maybe it's the Navy SEALs and they're doing a military exercise. Well, in the middle of the exercise, you need to be pretty top down. You need to have the person who's in charge giving commands, telling people where to go, having the plan. But then once you get into, let's say, the postmortem where you're wrapping up and saying what worked, what didn't work, well, then you can be totally flat. Then you want everyone's voices. And so I think leaders often feel pressure to be either the top-down leader or the everyone's equal leader. But I think actually you want to flex the hierarchy. And you do so by having confidence without attitude, the confidence to stand up, but also the humility to listen and be open to others.
I think that is beautifully rendered, Alex. In fact, when I was reading that section of your book, I texted a friend of mine and I told him about, the humility aspect of this. And I said, this is you. This is how you lead. And he is a very, very high level executive in an organization, has a lot of authority, and he brings that beautiful humility. He's radically altered the course of the organization just because of his presence.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I think often it's the humble leaders or some of the quieter leaders that maybe don't get that phrase, that they are leaders, but we tend to overvalue what we traditionally think of as a leader. And I've seen so many folks in my work, especially with teams and organizations, where there are these amazing leaders, people who get things done, but you ask them, are you a leader? And they go, oh no, I mean, I'm not. But the truth is that they actually are. And so the more we do to raise up those folks who are humble, I think that's a wonderful thing.
It really is, and it's so refreshing. And there's increasingly, you can't really read anything about leadership today without seeing something about emotional intelligence or empathy, which is where I want to go next. And so, that's one of the things that I'm doing, Alex, with my consultancy, is we are doubling down on humanity. We are teaching organizations and their people how to access their greater humanity, their greater emotional spectrum, their greater spiritual, relational spectrum, across their lives. So where I wanted to go next, and by the way, I had so many people when I was in California help me so much. I broke my foot and I've been hobbling around, as I mentioned. Talk about empathy. People really reaching out to be empathetic with me. So I was really intrigued, especially as I was experiencing all that, as I was reading your book while I was in California, when I read about this empathy exercise that you have your students do. Let's talk about that. Tell us how you set this up and what it is you are wanting the students to get out of it. It's fascinating.
Thanks. Yeah. First, it might be helpful just to identify there's actually 3 parts of empathy. We sometimes think about empathy as just one concept. There's actually 3 things. So the first is being able to recognize expressions and emotions in others. So think like reading another person.
Yeah.
The second one is being able to share emotional states. So if you maybe go to counseling, your therapist is probably very good at this, right? They can kind of see where you're feeling, feel those emotions. Great managers can do this. And then the third is really being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, see things from their perspective. Yeah. And I want to, again, just make very clear that empathy is not the same as sympathy. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means you're able to see things from where they are. And so I really want my students to focus on this third one, this idea of seeing things from another perspective. I recognize that in leading change, there's inevitably going to be conflict. It just is going to happen. If you're questioning the status quo, there will be people who just prefer the status quo. So conflict is inevitable. And so I want to prepare my students for thinking, how do they approach that conflict in thoughtful and effective ways? And so we do this experiment. And I actually think it works better to write it down rather than just think in your head. And so we begin by asking students to just come up with a recent frustrating experience. It could be small. It could be as small as, I don't know, someone cut you off while driving. It could be something that's a more systemic issue. Maybe your boss always interrupts you at work when you're talking. I want you to just really sit with that, kind of feel those emotions. I get them to feel that frustration, that sadness, that anger. Then the part that's maybe the most fun is I go, okay, let your most judgmental self out. Run wild with your judgments. Make all the worst judgments you can about someone. If someone cuts you off driving, well, they're just entitled and obnoxious and rich and whatever it is that you want to say. And students obviously like that part. Then I ask the question and I go, okay, so you've made these assumptions about someone. Is it true? And there's sort of a moment of silence. Then I go, okay, ask yourself this question. Is it 100% absolutely true? There's no possibility that you are wrong, that your judgments of them are exactly 100% correct. And I go, if you are, well, cool. Then you're done with the exercise. You've done it. But if there's even 0.001% chance that you're wrong, well, then let's continue on. And now that we've made the worst assumptions about someone, now we put ourselves in their shoes and say, where might they be coming from? And you're not saying that you know for sure. You're just imagining what the scenario could be. And then as we sit with that for a little bit longer, I try to help them elevate, right? So understand like where that person's coming from, but then think in terms of values. So once we get to a values level, values are neutral. It's not good or bad. It's how we operationalize the values. I think all of us, to some extent, value security or efficiency. They most show up in different ways we don't like, but we all like those things. And so we think about someone who's, cutting you off at work, not letting you speak. Well, maybe they're valuing efficiency. Maybe it's not a good way of putting that into practice, but that's what they're valuing. Once we move to this sort of values level, it allows you to speak to them at a more human level. Again, sympathy, not empathy, not the same thing. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You're just being able to see things from where they are. And you can still totally disagree with them. You can still think that their behavior is reprehensible. But you can at least understand where they're coming from. And then asking the question, okay, now that you've identified this, what might you do differently? And we found that just doing this thought experiment, which takes 5-7 minutes, you get someone's perspective. It's one thing to go, oh yeah, I'm an empathetic person. When you deeply empathize with someone who really annoys you, it forces you to actually sit with the complexity of the human experience and then to go forward with new perspectives.
I just think that's incredibly powerful. And then you've said that you've seen students just on the verge of tears as they realize that what it seemed like an intractable problem, including a roommate issue or whatever it was, suddenly they start to see that there's something else happening here. It opens something. Talk about that possibilities mindset you were mentioning before. So that's incredibly powerful that you have your students do that. So, I couldn't let you go without us talking about that. All right, let's grab our next break. I am Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Alex Budak. He is a UC Berkeley faculty member, social entrepreneur, author, and speaker. We've been talking about some of the crucial concepts and tools in his book to help you become a change maker. After the break, we're going to get into the idea that he has of reinventing leadership. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I mentioned in the last break that my latest book came out in March of 2023 called The Great Revitalization. What I did for you, since that's a book about creating optimal culture, is I gave you on my website a 3-page assessment that you can download. So it'll be able to help you understand the extent to which your organization is meeting the discerning standards of today's workforce. You can find it at gusto-now.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Alex Budak. He is the author of Becoming a Changemaker, an actionable, inclusive guide to leading positive change at any level. So as a person who helps develop, especially inspirational leaders, I was really intrigued at your idea of reinventing leadership. So let's go there next. Do you want to first talk about how you define leadership before you get there? Or?
Oh, sure. So I define leadership just simply as making meaningful things happen through and with other people.
I love it. It's so crisp.
Yeah, we often like to think about, characteristics or personality types or things like that. But no, I think it's actually about how do you do meaningful things through and with others. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it open. And then let's create on top of that.
Mm-hmm. So I love that. So then you do talk about 4 different aspects that you believe we need in the 21st century leadership skills. So, that's your idea of reinventing leadership. Yes.
Well, that's right. I guess I could share where it comes from, which is that
Yeah.
I first began my career in academia running a leadership center for Berkeley Haas. And I love this because it gave me the wonderful excuse to reach out to all these people, these leaders I admired, and people who would honestly never take my call otherwise. But because I came from a center, they were willing to sit down with me, have coffee or lunch. And I got to just have conversations. At least it's a little bit like what you get to do, just talk with interesting people. And I got to ask them questions. How did you develop your own model of leadership? And what was so interesting to me was that I found that the number one reason by far is that they had experienced bad leadership. They'd experienced a boss, a leader who didn't make them feel good. They weren't inclusive, or they did something that just wasn't right. And they made the conscious decision to do things differently. And I really love that because, again, it's about finding that human agency that we find in a lot of toxic cultures. This idea of a bad culture gets passed from the vice president down to the manager. Then the manager becomes the vice president, and they go, well, that's how we do things here. And so continue those toxic behaviors.
Yeah.
There's actual wonderful agency and freedom that comes from saying, no, that's not how it should be. And I'm going to choose my own model. And so I invite Changemaker leaders to actually learn from those bad experiences and then choose to do things differently.
I love that you brought that up, because when I was doing my research on meaning in work and identity, which is part of the basis of these 15 modes of engagement that I found, people talked about that a lot. When I asked them about their choices and such and what they found either meaningful or not, they would talk about these people that were bad experiences. And I came to describe those people because they had a role in their life. I call those people the anti-role models. Mm-hmm. And people are like, yes, that's it. That's exactly what they were. Yeah. Show me who I don't want to be.
Yeah, that's right. And there's real power in that, in choosing your own path. There's a chapter of the book which is called "Become the Leader You Wish You Had."
Yes.
And yeah, there's power in that. And by the way, that's a nice little framework for doing a lot of things. It's become the parent you wish you had. It's becoming the friend you wish you had. Become the coworker you wish you had. Mm-hmm. You can't take away the bad things that happen to you, but you do have a choice in terms of what you do going forward, and can often inform how you want to show up.
Indeed. And so, what I think is interesting is I think sometimes people, well, one thing, people conflate leadership and management. We're talking about leadership here. And I appreciate that you outlined 4 steps to reinventing leadership. So let's talk about those. I think they're very simple and incredibly actionable. But there are a lot of meat in them too. Let's talk about them.
Maybe you could throw each to me one at a time, and then I can.
Yeah. Okay. So the first one that I want you to talk about, if you would, is just stop waiting for permission. Don't wait for somebody to, hire you as a leader or to give you the role as a leader. Just stop waiting for permission.
Yeah. If we keep waiting for that magical moment where we're finally a leader, where someone taps us on the shoulder and goes, "Okay, you've been toiling away really hard for 25 years. Now
you're a leader." Yeah.
Then that will never happen. Sorry, it's not going to happen. So then you just be waiting and waiting and waiting. And instead, you can actually give yourself that permission to step up. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to walk into the CEO's office and go, "Here's all the things you're doing wrong. Let me tell you." No, the point is that you find that permission to sort of step up, to go beyond things. Maybe it's that your manager gives you a task and goes, "Hey, I want you to do it this way." And you go, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it that way. But also, by the way, I did what you asked. And here's the other thing that I did, which I thought would be helpful. Or here's someone else I think we should talk to, or compiled a list of 10 folks we should give this presentation to." Those are things that very rarely will a manager tell you, "Oh, you went too far." If you did, fine, scale back a little bit. But giving yourself that permission instead of waiting for it changes the whole identity. When you start seeing yourself as a leader, I say that leadership is not a title. Leadership is an act. And so give yourself that permission to actually step up and serve.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much value add in that too. So we had to start there. Now, the second one that I think is really incredibly powerful, and I think horribly underutilized, is you talk about the leadership skill of leveraging the power of networks.
Yeah, we often, as leaders, want to make everything about us. Julia Z wrote a great article in Stanford's Social Innovation Review talking about the most impactful leaders we've never heard of. And one of the concepts is that you want to be a node, not a hub. So in other words, a hub is where all the energy is swirling around you. You are central to everything. But instead, be a node, be helpful, plug into things where you can, be of service to others where you can. This is a lesson I learned the hard way myself as an entrepreneur. In the early days of Start So Good, I would judge myself based on how often did my team come to me for advice, for making a decision for them. And on that measure, I was doing really well because they were constantly coming to me. But what I realized is that I'd become a huge bottleneck to our team, that they were asking me everything to like, what do you think about this tweet we're about to send? And I thought I was doing great, but actually I was slowing our team down. I realized that our team had become like a merry-go-round, that I was the pole firmly in the center. And there's all this activity swirling around me, but we weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I stepped back and gave my team power and realized that I want to judge myself based on how many decisions do I not need to make. Can I set the vision and the values so that they know the right decision to make, the one we want to make as a team that's in line with where we want to take this company, and they don't need me. And that's when we started taking off, was once I get myself out of the way. So being a node, not a hub.
Mm-hmm. You were elevating everyone. That's fantastic. I love that. Okay, then the third one is that you talk about is the 3 V's of leading with purpose, our vision, values, and victories. I love that. That's a fantastic combination, especially the last one.
Yeah, so as changemakers, as leaders, one of the greatest gifts we can give to those on our team is giving them that sense of purpose. I think people, you've written about this, you talk about this, people are hungry for a sense of purpose. And what an amazing thing you can give to have someone feel like their work matters, that their contributions matter. And purpose unlocks that. But it's not as simple as just sort of saying, oh, we're going to have a culture of purpose. And so I really say, look, to create that, there's 3 V's. So the first is vision. I define vision as painting a picture of the future that's so compelling that people can't help but want to be part of it with you.
Yeah.
And there's a story which I think is apocryphal, but I like it to exemplify this, which goes, a journalist was walking through the halls of NASA, and she finds a janitor, and she asks the janitor, what do you do for a living? And just to be clear, janitors do really important and totally underappreciated work. But she goes, what do you do for a living? And he goes, I help launch rockets into space. So it's the guy that's so bought into the mission and vision of NASA that he sees how his work, however removed, is connected.
Yeah.
In your own work, if you're trying to influence someone to be part of your changes, can you help an accountant see how them doing the numbers in the right way will lead to this change you're creating? Can you also get a sense of the vision where the marketers pull into it and they create something even better than you could have? So vision. Second is values, giving people a way of working. And the data here are super clear. If you want to engage Gen Z, you've got to be thoughtful about your values. According to Gallup, 70% of Gen Z wants to work for organizations that match or reflect their values. So it's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have, it's a table stakes.
Yeah.
But there's ways you can define yourself. So again, I mentioned that I love working at Berkeley Haas. And the big reason is because one of our values is questioning the status quo. That felt comfortable to me. I'm an atypical person to be at a business school. But when I saw, this is a business school that wants to question the status quo, I said, yeah, that's who I am. I want to be part of that. So values give people a sense of working, of purpose. Mm-hmm. And the third is victories. Some people, maybe those that naturally find themselves as change makers, we have this kind of long-term perspective, or at least you've written 3 books at least, and you know how hard it is to write a book. Mm-hmm. And you're in it for the long haul because you have that vision. But not all of us do, right? Sometimes it feels really overwhelming, or we want to be part of a big change, but then also feels, oh, this can take forever. And this is a mistake that I honestly made myself, because I'm so bought into that large vision, where I want to be in 15 years, 20 years, that I kind of forget to celebrate the milestones along the way. You or I might not rest until we reach that big systemic change. But we've got to help our teammates see how their contributions are leading to that change. So stopping to celebrate those victories, the small things, the small steps that bring us closer to that vision. So to lead with purpose, focus on vision, on values, and on victories.
Beautifully rendered, Alex. And I'm hanging on every word because I totally align with everything that you said, of course, because of the work that I do too. I think that was is that everything? There's also leading with values means giving your team a way of working. Yes, you covered that. And small wins. Okay, so that's good. So these 4 steps to reinventing leadership, for me, this is in complete alignment with the work that I do. So if that's what you mean by reinventing leadership, I am right in your backyard, in your back pocket with you. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Reinventing it together. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then part of that I think is really quite also unique that you put forth in your book, something that I really haven't seen before, Alex, and this your idea of microleadership. Let's just briefly hit on that.
Yeah, a new concept I put forward, which is making that shift, because so often when you read a lot of leadership books, it's about that single heroic act. Right. It's about Steve Jobs pulling the iPhone out of his pocket. It's about Eleanor Roosevelt leading the Declaration of Human Rights. There's a role for that type of leadership. But I think when we put those leaders up on a pedestal, it causes so many of us to say, that's not who I am. I'm not that charismatic. I'm not outgoing. I'm not an extrovert. We give ourselves a reason to say that's not us. But leadership isn't an act. Leadership isn't a title. Leadership is an act. It's a way of showing up in the world. And so things look very different, going back to our idea of agency, when you say, look, it's not about having a title. It's about seizing leadership moments. And these moments appear before us dozens of times per day, small little moments, small chances to step up and serve others. And so for me, there's really 3 steps to practicing microleadership. So the first, giving yourself permission to say, yeah, you know what? I don't need someone else to tell me I can step up and help in a small way. What does this look like? Maybe it's during a team meeting, you notice one of your colleagues hasn't spoken up, and you say, hey, no pressure, but would love to hear from you if you're willing to share your perspective.
Love it.
Maybe it's being the one person saying no when everyone else is saying yes. Or maybe it's staying late to help a new colleague clean up after their first event. Right? These are tiny moments. You'll never go too far, but you give yourself that permission. So give yourself permission. The second is serve others. My definition of leadership is rooted in serving others. Fundamentally, I love servant leadership, small little actions, ways of going beyond yourself that make things better for those around you. And then the third is do it again and again and again. The idea that any one act of microleadership will be insignificant. But if you practice it every single day, you might look back after a month or a quarter and realize, well, before my own eyes, I've just become a leader. Because when you stop waiting for that title, instead you see it as acts, then those acts add up. And before you know it, you've become that leader.
Beautiful. And that is such a beautiful, easy, open entry point for every single person listening to this program. So that's microleadership, ladies and gentlemen. We have pretty much come to the end of the show already here, Alex. But before we do, I just want to quickly say, and maybe before I want you to close, I do want to just quickly share with our listeners and viewers that you list 6 traits of an inclusive leader that I just think is really important for today's world. And then listeners and viewers, you just got to read the book to learn more about them. But they are visible commitment to inclusivity. Number 2 is humility, which we talked about. 3 is curiosity about others. Can't emphasize that enough. And then 4th, cultural intelligence, also very critical. 5th, effective collaboration. And 6th, awareness of bias. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, every single one of us has bias. It's part of the human condition. So just wanted to give that a quick shout out, Alex. I think this is a fantastic list for inclusive leadership.
Thank you. Just to say that's actually the work of Juliet Bork and Andrea Espedito. So I built off of that. But yeah, they're the ones that originally created that.
Of course, giving credit where credit is due. I appreciate that. So by now that this show is listened to by people around the world. And what they tune in for is to learn something about how to either experience a destination workplace, or how to develop their own skills, or to become the kind of leader that can steward that kind of a work world for others. What would you like to leave them with?
Oh, there's so many wonderful threads that we built together today. I wish we had just more time because I'd like to build on some more of them. But I think if there's one thing, the theme that kept coming out again and again is this idea of agency, this idea that you're more powerful than you ever thought that you are. And I also believe that the world has never been more ready for you. And so I hope that you'll leave this being willing to give yourself permission to see leadership as being a little less scary than you otherwise might be. You also lead in your own way. There's no one way to lead. Lean into your values, lean into vision. But more than anything, stop waiting for permission, give it to yourself, and go be a change maker.
Well, what a beautiful way to finish this show, Alex. I am so grateful our paths have crossed. I am so grateful that I get to host this show, and I come into contact with brilliant minds like you, that when I read your work, I become a better version of myself, and then I get to share with my listeners and viewers. So thank you for being on Working on Purpose and being you.
Thanks, Lisa. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Me too. All right, listeners and viewers, you are going to want to learn more about Alex Budak and the work that he does, helping to create change makers all around the world, and his book, Becoming a Changemaker. So you can start by visiting him at his website, alexbudak.com. Let me spell that for you. Alex, A-L-E-X, Budak, B-U-D-A-K, alexbudak.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with David Pearl, the creator and founder of Street Wisdom, which provides workshops of curious discovery around the world. And he's also the author of Wonderful, Find Wonder in the Everyday, every day. It was an amazing conversation. And I had him sing opera as well in Italian. It was beautiful. Next week, we'll be on air with Majda Dijevic, talking about her new book, The Possible Self, The Leader's Guide to Personal Development. See you then, and remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, so let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.